Hello, and welcome to the Nurturing Resilience podcast, where me, your host, Leisha Nelson, weaves together the worlds of somatics, science, and energetics to nurture a deeper connection to yourself. This is a podcast that covers a span of topics and ideas, from guest storytelling their rites of passage that catalyzed their resiliency, to nervous system and mind-body health education, to deep contemplation on topics such as cultivating connection to ourselves and others in a complex world. I'm an occupational therapist, somatic practitioner, and body worker, attachment specialist, and baby whisperer, with over 20 years of experience with mind-body connection and supporting matrescence. What you're receiving today and listening today is the uncut version of my podcast. This is where I interview guests and I don't do any editing. You're getting it all in the raw. If you're interested in my podcast, you can find that on Spotify, which is the edited version. And if you're interested in my work, you can follow me on Instagram at Leisha Nilsson and also through my website at leishanilsson.com. If you enjoy what you hear today, if you enjoy this podcast, please share it on your social media pages with your friends, your family, your loved ones. Let the world know that it's here. If you really like it, you can follow me and write a review. That's how my podcast gets out to listeners like you. And this important information about the body, somatics, and nervous system can find more people that need it. All right, thanks so much, and let's dive in. Thank you, Chloe, for joining me today. I'm super excited to have you here to talk about all things fertility awareness. And I have to say, I feel like I didn't have a clear understanding of what fertility awareness method was, and then read some books. Still don't feel like I had a full, clear understanding until I met with you. And now I have so much more learning to continue to do.
Yeah, it's one of those things that reminds me when I started my education with the Justice College. I started knowing nothing, and I graduated 2 years later knowing even less. Because you're like, what? There's just so much to know. It's incredible. Yeah.
There is so much to know. So I'll share with our listeners that I chose to have a single session with you. It's on my radar in the future to do another single session with you. So we can talk about your services in a little bit. But I chose to meet with you because I took my IUD out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm preventing pregnancy because I'm still having a menstrual cycle, still capable to get pregnant. And this was the way that I felt like was the best natural and holistic way to address not having a baby. I know a lot of people use this to have a baby. So let's just dive in. Like, what is fertility awareness method? Like, what does that mean?
Very simply, it's being aware of your fertility. Right? And it also begins with the awareness that you're not fertile every single day. And that's a huge myth that continues today, where we feel like, or we know or think that we can become pregnant at any time in our cycle. But the truth is, part of being a woman and being somebody who has a cycle and a uterus is that we are different and that we change. Similar to the earth seasons change from winter to spring, summer to fall. Similar to the moon that comes up every single night, but shows up at different phases, we too have a hormonal pattern that changes and can be compared to the seasons or to the phases of the moon. So fertility awareness is simply slowing down and on a daily basis, paying attention to the change in your body by paying attention to the 3 signs of fertility. And those signs include your basal body temperature, your cervical position, and your cervical mucus.
And just by tracking those 3 things, you can get a pretty clear picture of what's going on with your body and your cycle.
Yeah, and you don't even need to chart all 3. So if somebody was going to begin, you always start with cervical mucus. That's the first sign. And then if you want to add the secondary sign of basal body temperature, or you want to add the other sign of cervical position, then you can. But I always want to remind people, I charted cervical mucus for 2 years before I added temperature.
Wow.
Mhm.
Okay. Which I think is so funny because I think when most people hear about this method, they automatically think, oh, I'm going to be taking my temperature.
Yeah. And for many people, that is like the clearer sign, because cervical mucus can be so nuanced and there's a lot to know about cervical mucus. Whereas temperature, you just take your temperature every morning. Now, that being said, I believe that all three signs can be really fun and easy. It just kind of depends on your motivation to the practice. It depends on how you're showing up for yourself, cycle to cycle. It depends on your curiosity and your interest, and also the kind of education that you invest in. Because trying to interpret your cervical mucus changes while also trying to figure out, is this arousal fluid or vaginal self slough or leftover seminal fluid from the night before? Or is this fertile? Is this not fertile? Like, I can understand the frustration for sure, especially when you show up online and there's so much contradictory information and everyone is, talking about it in different ways. So it can be a bit confusing at
Yeah.
first, but it doesn't have to be.
So what would you tell someone that does want to start paying attention to cervical mucus? They're reading all this stuff online. They have no idea what's happening. It's very confusing, but it actually doesn't have to be confusing. What would you tell them to make it less confusing?
Oh, invest in an educator.
Such
Sure. I mean, I'm not biased because I am a fertility awareness educator. But when I wanted to learn when I was 23, so I've been charting for 12 years. And when I learned to chart when I was 23, yeah, I invested in an educator who happened to live in my neighborhood. And so I paid someone in person. And for me, that's the kind of learner I am, where I want someone to hold my hand. I want someone, like I never scrolled through the websites or the blog posts. I actually don't even think 12 years ago it was talked about as much as it is now. There weren't Instagram posts, there weren't as many people talking about it online. And so I really appreciated having that one person to tell me everything I needed to know to make it really clear and concise, and to have that supervision so that, they were watching me, correcting my mistakes, walking me through the process. And because it was so easy, that's why I thought, oh my goodness, more people need to know about this. Like, how is this not talked about as an option? Because I came to fertility awareness for contraception. And it's funny, I like to tell people that, I started for birth control, but I stayed for the body literacy. And
Mm,
it's that I just wanted to prevent pregnancy because I had breast cancer in my family. I didn't want to be taking any, synthetic ethinyl estradiols in my body to be increasing my risk for breast cancer. Um, Somehow intuitively, I just knew that I wanted to have my natural cycle and my ovulation. And so looking for contraception, even to this day, is like, how do you like your hormones? In a pill, in a patch, in an IUD, right? And so for me, it was like, I want something hormone free. Like, there's gotta be something else. And so of course I stumbled upon the IUD, the copper IUD. And my mom was like, oh, you put that thing in there and you're going to be in the emergency room on your first period. And so I'm like, okay, I don't want that in. And even now I know many people don't have that experience with the IUD. I didn't want to put anything inside my body. I actually tried the NuvaRing, or I thought about the NuvaRing because doctors told me that it was more localized and less hormones. And I remember I pulled the NuvaRing out to insert it for the first time with my boyfriend at the time. And he was like, no way you're putting that penis strangling apparatus up your vagina. And I never did. It just never went in. And so then we discovered the rhythm method and the idea that, the calendar method where you count days. And well, that didn't feel effective at all. And so it was actually through the church that I discovered fertility awareness, because my cousin was getting married at the time, and through the Catholic Church, and they had to do a marriage prep, which taught them how to pay attention to their cycle in order to plan their family. So the more religious perspective of this information is called natural family planning. Now, it's been 12 years, and I mean, fertility awareness is like my everything. I eat, breathe, and sleep fertility awareness. Not only have I been practicing it myself, but it's like I teach it. Like, I pay my rent, I feed myself through, teaching this education. But for me, it's so much more than just contraception now. It's about, understanding your health through understanding your cycle. It's about appreciating cyclical living and knowing that my needs, my wants, my desires are going to change on a daily basis. It's about knowing that as a 35-year-old who just got married a few months ago and hearing all of these buzzwords like geriatric pregnancy, knowing like, no, like I've been paying attention to my cycle for the past 12 years. I know what I need. I know I'm still ovulating. And so it's this way I have empowered myself through this education has followed me through many phases of my life. And that's a lot of the work that I have to do, is teach people that fertility doesn't just mean having babies. Yeah. In fact, I'm one of the few full spectrum fertility awareness educators that I'm aware of where I teach from the first period to the last. So I put on period positivity workshops for 9-year-olds all the way up to educating people in their perimenopausal, approaching their menopausal years, and everyone in between. Because paying attention to your cycle and having this relationship with your body, no matter what age you are, is going to be just so beautiful and beneficial.
Yeah. Wow, so much there. Thank you. I loved everything you said. One thing that really struck out was when you said birth control. You started for birth control, but stayed for the body literacy. And I'm hearing in your language just some different nuances and how tracking your cycle can give you body literacy. But to you, like, what does that actually mean, body literacy? And, you might be learning, well, this is the day I ovulate, or these are the days that I have my menstrual cycle. But I feel like it's deeper than that. There's so much more body literacy that we're learning with this. And it's why I'm also becoming more and more passionate about it, and why I'm choosing to do this, is the connection with the body. So what is that for you, that body literacy piece?
I mean, on the most fundamental level, it's the knowledge that I gain by paying attention to the changes in my body. And what that knowledge is going to be is going to change person to person, right? And it's also changed depending on where I am in my life, right? Like, for example, now that I'm preparing for possible, conception, body literacy for me is really paying attention to the health of my cycle, paying attention to, how can I take care of myself better? Body literacy is, how can I eat better? How can I appreciate even just my fertile body? It's almost difficult to put into words, body literacy. I'm curious, how would you describe body literacy? What's been your experience?
I think, on a more global perspective, not necessarily just with my cycle, but body literacy, I think, can translate to the same thing, where I kind of know how my body feels and how my body moves through the world. And if I notice some things off, it can be a sign like, oh, something's going on there. And I've learned, because I have a tendency to be more anxious and hypervigilant, that it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing if something's different. It's just a way of my body talking to me, saying, hey, pay attention for just a minute. Can we have a check-in? Can we have a tune-up? Can I have a moment of your awareness
Oh, I
to
love
this
that.
thing?
When I teach people how to chart their cervical mucus observations, the first thing you need to learn is that you have to check for mucus every single day throughout the whole day, before you go to the bathroom and after. So you need to take your toilet paper, fold it into a little cervical mucus canvas, wipe front to back before you go to the bathroom and after. And it's very common for people to come back to me a couple weeks later and say, Chloe, I'm always missing the before check because I'm waiting to the last second to pee. And then I'm trying to get my toilet paper ready and I'm trying to check, but I waited too long. Like I can't hold it anymore. And it's like, the body literacy. Like, how basic of body literacy is it when our body tells us that we have an urge to go to the washroom and then we listen to it versus waiting until it's an emergency. So that was actually one of the most beautiful gifts that I got. The very first gift I got when I started practicing was to listen and respond to your body cues. And when you feel like you have to go pee, go pee.
Don't wait.
Right?
I'll say the one I always miss is the shower.
Mm.
It's like checking before and after shower time.
Well,
Just
and the
like,
whole point is that you don't actually necessarily see a lot of cervical mucus throughout the day. And that's another big misconception, is that people are expecting that to have like this fountain of this like fertility nectar rolling down their leg. And that's not always the way it is. You might only have one observation of sticky, cloudy cervical mucus for that entire day. So in order to feel confident in your interpretation of the method, especially if you're using it for contraception, you want to make sure that you're having accurate observations. And so you just don't want to miss it. You just don't want to miss that one observation you might have for the whole day. And I remember when I was first learning, I thought, oh my goodness, like this feels like a lot of pressure. And then I realized, like, well, where is it going to go? Like, I'm wearing underwear, right? So it's not like it can get lost. So it's just those times throughout the day where you have the potential to like urinate it away or wash it away in the shower, that you just want to make sure that you're doing a quick check. So I always say, whenever you're, in the bathroom, you got your clothes off and you have toilet paper handy, just do a quick little check.
And that kind of brings us back to the first thing that you had said, and around having basically a mentor to walk you through this. And this is why you teach women this one-on-one and in groups. And one, it made me think of, that's probably how it used to be. Like we used to have wise women, wise crones that were teaching younger maiden women these things and like taking them by the hand and showing them, and how much that's been lost in our society. Like we don't turn to the mentor, we don't turn to the wise woman, we just look on Instagram.
And I want to say
yeah.
that, and I understand where you're going there, but I've also noticed a bit of a change in perspective, especially of women and women's health, where there is more radical responsibility and more advocacy for themselves. Where I think in the more recent past, we really outsourced our health to people in white coats. I remember even looking for a contraception. I went to see a gynecologist because who better than a gynecologist to educate me in all of the things that I could choose for contraception. And it's this, older man in a white coat telling me that no, fertility awareness is only for people who want 12 kids. Right. And now I see a lot of people actually reaching out to other mentors, and some of them are Instagram influencers, but we are being more community led, where instead of outsourcing our health or our decisions or our advocacy, we want to take that back on, and we're using our peers and our community to help us and support us through that.
Yeah. Great counterpoint. And just finding that sovereignty and empowerment through where we can. And nothing against Instagram. That's actually how I found you.
Yeah, no, but it's going back to the radical responsibility, though, is you kind of also have to have a discernment as well, especially, oh my goodness, like I can't even imagine how we're bombarded with information. Again, many of it contradictory information. So when I think like about myself, and if I have something that I need support on, right, I'm so people oriented. I'm going to find that person that I can trust, that I know, like, and trust to support me in that. And the cool thing about social media and Instagram and the internet is that it does give us like this plethora of options that we can choose from, but we still have to bring our own discernment, our own intuition into the process, for sure.
Yeah. And I'm big too, just my own personality, on choosing people that have been doing it for a long time. Just biased that way. So you started at 23, you said?
Yeah.
And then I heard you mention that you actually went to school for this.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. What does that mean?
So it's really still the wild, wild west in the fertility awareness world, meaning that anybody can really call themselves a fertility awareness educator and can be teaching this, which I support. Like, I love that people are talking about their cycles, sharing their body literacy, their cycle awareness with their friends. colleagues, people in their community. So I love that. The more fertility awareness educators in the world, the better. When I decided I wanted to be a fertility awareness educator, I knew that this wasn't a hobby, that this wasn't, just something that conversation that I wanted to have small talk, like in parties or in set group settings, but that I actually wanted to make it my profession, to teach others and to support others and to support them in my best that I possibly could. So after I had put some investment in learning myself, my fertility awareness education for myself, after I charted for 2 years just by myself, I then wanted to become a fertility awareness educator, partly because, again, I wanted to support people, but also it was the lifestyle I wanted for myself. I had been living abroad in Colombia. I had been traveling a lot. I wanted to be able to have a way of earning an income where I could be on my own time, my own schedule, and from anywhere in the world. So I discovered the Justice College International. And it was actually it's a school founded here in my city, Edmonton, Alberta, in 1987. And it's one of a few different education systems, colleges, whatever you want to call them, that you can get some information. And there's a association called the Association of Fertility Awareness Professionals, and they accredit, I believe it's 4 institutions to say that there's like a level of education. There's, they has to like mark off all the boxes. And so Justice is one of them. And it's a 2-year program, even though I know that the founder, Dr. Geraldine Mattis, always said it should have been more like 4 years, but nobody's going to sign up for 4 years. But it's like I said, it was one of those things where you start, I felt like I knew nothing, and I graduated knowing even less. So yeah, I graduated with the designation of a holistic reproductive health practitioner and fertility awareness educator. And that was 7 years ago. I graduated 7 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the questions I asked you just when we met one-on-one is if you've seen an upsurgence in fertility awareness fertility awareness method in unison in the United States when there was a transition to making abortion illegal again.
Yeah. I remember even just deciding whether or not enough people cared about this, if I could, again, make a living off of this. And I was living in an apartment at the time, and a magazine was being sent to this apartment that was not, it was like the previous owner. And I'm flipping through this like Cosmo magazine, and they were talking about like the Justice fertility awareness method. And I'm like, what? And so it started, I noticed it was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and more people were talking about this. And then there's been a lot of events with abortion rights, with reproductive rights. Again, this turn where people are wanting to take more control over their own bodies, just educate themselves more. I think a lot of people are waking up to the fact that hormonal birth control is a lot harder on our bodies than I think, we had thought in the past, right? For example, a lot of people still don't realize that being on hormonal birth control isn't regulating your cycle. It's shutting it down. And that the bleed on hormonal birth control is not even a real period. In fact, it was a marketing ploy, meaning that when they were designing the pill, they knew that they had to put a bleed in there or else women wouldn't take it. Because even though a lot of us complain and, on my period and it's curse and it sucks, intuitively, I think deep down, we all know that this is really important. And that if it's not happening, something must be off. Mm-hmm. So there's no need. So if you're someone listening to this and you have passed through those placebo pills, or you just kept taking the pills because you didn't want to bleed and you felt really guilty about it, here's your permission to not feel guilty about that anymore, because it wasn't even necessary. A bleed on the pill is not necessary. You're not ovulating. If you're not, the definition of a true period is a bleeding event that follows ovulation by about 2 weeks. Mm. Yeah. So you want the ovulation. And that's, again, I think people are kind of waking up to this realization that our wombs, when there's a beautiful quote from Dr. Geraldine Mattis that I wish I could say verbatim right now, but it's when you look at your own body and your own fertility as just a baby making thing, you are commodifying your own body. Mm. Right? And I think people are kind of realizing wait a second, being a fertile woman is a healthy woman, regardless of whether I want to conceive or not. And realizing that the creative, like we in our bodies, I was just having this conversation with a client earlier this morning about how through our menstrual cycles, through the events of ovulation and menstruation, we are experiencing many deaths and many births on a regular basis. And that this creative energy that we use to release an egg, which then has the potential to become a whole new human being, can also be used for something else. That creative energy can be used into a personal project, writing a book, building a business, nurturing a relationship. And so shutting down that system with hormonal birth control, which is why we get all these terrible symptoms like brain fog, low libido, clitoral shrinkage, gut issues, like increased risks for cancers. And so it's like, well, I don't want to be on the pill, but now what?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that was my story, and I had been on hormonal birth control, 16, go to the doctor, irregular period. Oh, let's put you on birth control because that's what we do in the 90s. And we don't know what to do with you. And to say it was a female gynecologist too that put me on birth control at 16. And then getting off that, not until I think I was like 30. I think I was on it for 16 or 17 years. And so just after 30, and then switching to the copper IUD.
Mm-hmm.
And then going down some rabbit holes recently, realizing that there actually is a point where you can be on the copper IUD too long and cause health issues. And like, we actually don't have that much long-term research information on long-term effects of any of the birth controls. Like, we don't actually know what it's doing. And some of my theory is like, well, that's why so many women have menopausal issues, premenopausal issues, thyroid issues, because if you're messing with your hormones, it's going to mess with your liver and your thyroid. Like, we can't shut down a part of our body and expect the rest of our body to flourish.
Well, when you think about it, the pill, the hormonal birth control pill, is the only medication we give to healthy people to make them unhealthy in order to serve its purpose.
Whoa. Just like taking that in, that is wild. Yeah. So I feel like there's always someone whenever I go onto these like birth control moments, I'll call it a moment. People are always like, but we're so happy and like we're so lucky and it's like women empowerment. And part of my argument is like, I actually think it's more women empowerment to know the health of your cycle and live cyclically.
The other thing that I experienced over 7 years of teaching this and 12 years of practicing it myself is that I'm actually not against the pill in the sense that I don't claim to know anybody's story or anybody's situation. And I actually don't think that everybody can practice fertility awareness as a method of contraception. I think there's a lot of nuances and a lot of things to consider, sexual agency being one of them. Like, I'll never forget, I met while I was living abroad, I met somebody who had an IUD inserted because they were on a bit of a risky travel and they thought that their risk of rape would be increased and they didn't want to put themselves in a situation where they were having sex without their consent and without contraception. So, I mean, that's a little bit of an out there example, but there's many reasons why somebody or the person who's in nursing school whose symptoms of endometriosis are so terrible that they can't even get through, their schoolwork, then suppressing these symptoms with the pill might be something they want to do for a temporary period of time. For me, it's just about the informed decision making. So understanding exactly what it is hormonal birth control is doing, which I'm actually not even a fan of the term birth control to refer to the pill or to refer to contraception, because number one, to call it birth control and to actually think that we can do that we can control birth in this way is like saying we could control the waves or control the moon. right? So we don't, even like with fertility awareness method, I always say it's a contraception. It's not birth control, because we can't control birth. We can only learn to live, or to gain the knowledge and the skill to understand where we are in our cycles and to make our decisions that are best for us. But we all know somebody who's been on the pill or has had the IUD, and then the baby comes out holding the IUD, right? Like, this is forces of nature we're trying to work with here, right? And then same thing, it's funny, like, even hearing you say, well, they put me on birth control when I was 16. And I think about how many other girls, even younger, were put on birth control to assess a medical issue. And yet how, like, the term birth control is just so not like encompassing of what's actually happening, especially when like a 13-year-old is probably not trying to control their birth, right? What it is, it's an ovulation suppressant. So let's call it what it is, right? Or the fact that the hormones in birth control or hormonal contraception, they're not your natural hormones. So let's not call them estrogen and progesterone. That's not what they are. They're ethinyl estradiol and progestins, like levonorgestrel. They're not the same thing. So yeah, like, words like this are really important for me to also educate people on, to help them kind of have a better understanding. But that's the whole point for me, is that we can educate ourselves and then make informed decisions for ourselves. Yeah. And so whether it's you choose to be on hormonal birth control, even just for like a little bit, or right, like, so many people I know have shared a similar story to yours, where you went on it when you were super young, and then you're in your like late 20s, even early 30s when you stop, right? Whereas even nowadays, even the young people that I know in my life, they're going on hormonal contraception for like a year, and then they break up with their boyfriend and they're like, and then they go off of it. It doesn't become like this chronic thing that we do every single day. Or like, I like to tell the little ones in my life, like the teenagers that I know that are going on hormonal birth control, that, okay, what's happening, what it's doing, keep out for certain symptoms. Because again, how many people have brain fog or gut issues and have no idea that like their chronic yeast infection has something to do with being on the pill? So just being aware of these symptoms, right? And so that's what it's all about for me. I don't want to sit here and shame anyone for, making these decisions, because it's like I said, I don't know what's best for you. That's body literacy, is having the relationship with your own body to feel confident and informed to make the decisions that are best for you.
Yeah. Great definition. Good, beautiful definition. And at 16, I didn't have body literacy. And I just think about, there probably wasn't an underlying issue. It's pretty common to have an irregular cycle as a teen and to not be ovulating. Your body's figuring out how to ovulate for the first time.
It takes up to 7 years, even 7 to 12 years after your first period to regulate. So you are 100% correct on that. And that's more information that people need to know. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, God, let's yell that one from the rooftops, that it takes 7 to 12 years, because the solution was, like, we'll just put her on an ovulation suppressant, so she just doesn't ovulate at all.
Exactly.
Fixes the problem.
Exactly.
I'm going to take us back a little bit. We talked a little bit about, so there's the 3 parts: basal body temperature, cervical position, cervical mucus. We start with cervical mucus, have a mentor or a guide to help you understand what that means. What would be next? Is it basal body temperature or cervical position?
Well, it really depends, actually, on who you are. So, for example, basal body temperature requires 5 hours of undisturbed sleep. So not everybody's getting that. So if I think of all of my clients who are postpartum and they're not getting 5 hours of undisturbed sleep in order to take an accurate BBT, they might rely more on cervical position as that secondary sign. So they'll focus more on cervical position. That being said, one of the fertility gadgets that I actually do like would be like the temp drop. So temp drop is a wearable thermometer that you put around high up on your arm so that it's tucked up under your armpit. And you wear this thermometer while you sleep. And it takes thousands of readings while you're asleep and then kind of spits out an average nighttime temperature. So that even if you're not getting those 5 hours of sleep, or if you're somebody with disturbed sleep, you work shift work, then the temp drop can still help you to confirm ovulation. So it really just depends on who you are, your motivation, but to know that you have those options as a secondary sign. Mm-hmm.
Are there other things that you can learn about your body if you are taking a daily temperature?
Yeah, 100%. So number one, you can confirm ovulation. But since your temperature is a measurement of your metabolism, well, what governs our metabolism? Our thyroid health. So you can kind of indirectly gain a little bit of insight into your thyroid health by paying attention to the range, especially in which your pre-ovulatory temperatures are. Now, before you go running to your charts and looking at what range your temperatures are in, it's important that you have an accurate, real data of your BBT to kind of make these inferences. So that means that temp drop, the wearable smart thermometer I just talked about, is not an accurate BBT. So you don't use that information to gain insight into your thyroid health. The gold standard for assessing your temperature for thyroid health is with a glass thermometer under your arm for 10 minutes. You can get away with using a digital one if you warm it up first. So warm it up for the 10 minutes and then take your temperature. But if you're using like a digital in your mouth and you just hit it until it beeps, or even under your arm and just until it beeps, then you're just getting a reading too quickly. So it's probably not going to warm up to the true BBT, which means you may find that your temps are actually a lot lower. And then I don't want you to be quick to start diagnosing yourself with thyroid issues, right? So we want to make sure that we're having proper BBT. And even then, it's not a diagnosis. It's an invitation if you're having low temps. So we would say Fahrenheit is escaping me right now. I think it's 97.4. If your pre-ovulatory temps are consistently below 97.4 or below 36.3 degrees Celsius, then your metabolism is sluggish, which may mean that your thyroid needs some love. So it's the invitation to go seek a healthcare provider and maybe get some lab work done. Maybe go online and get a quiz, like a thyroid quiz, to see if other symptoms you are also having are showing up with thyroid issues. So it's not a diagnosis, but it's an invitation to be curious and to look more into it. And you can understand your stress levels. So whenever I look at somebody's BBT, if they have really like erratic temperatures, like high and low and high and low and high and low, and I've done my due diligence to check on how they're taking their temperature and everything is fine, then it might actually be a reflection of their adrenal health and their stress levels. You could also see like deficiencies, certain deficiencies, like a magnesium deficiency in somebody's temperatures. And I even had a client who found out she had a sensitivity to seafood, because every time she ate seafood, she would take her temperature the next day and she'd have this weird skyrocket high temp. So you could even, if you're really curious and really paying attention to like what you're eating and then what your temperatures are the next day, you could really gain some insight on what are some foods that might be causing some inflammation in your body or that you might be sensitive to. Body literacy.
So if someone's having these crazy spikes, would you need to be having consistent information before drawing to any conclusions? Like, would you need to have a couple months of data to see like, okay, when I eat seafood, I spike the next day?
Yeah. It's your charts are your ultimate feedback tool. But again, you can't have any good information or any good insights until you know that you're getting good data. So I always tell people that like your first chart is your rogue chart. Even your first 3, you're just learning. You're still figuring it out. You're probably over charting your cervical mucus. You're charting your arousal fluid. You're probably not ruling out your disturbances in your temperature. So there's a lot of things that can disturb your temperature besides thyroid issues, adrenal issues, or magnesium deficiency. So some of the most common ones are drinking alcohol the night before will increase your temperature. So how's that for a sensitivity, right? for inflammation in our body. So
Mhm.
test it out. Test it out. Drink enough alcohol to make you dizzy and then take your temperature the next morning.
Whoa.
Another one is sleeping in. So you want to take your temperature at about the same time every day. You have like a window of about 2 hours. So let's say you usually wake up at 8, then from 7 to 9 is your window. So if you're taking it outside of that window, if you sleep in until 10 or 11 one day, then your temperature may be higher. So you want to rule that out. Illness. If you have the flu or if you're sick, it's going to be too high. So you have to also learn what disturbs your temperatures and make sure you're just ruling those out before you're jumping into any health insights.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll speak to my own experience. Like, I think I did 3 months, maybe 2, went to Peru, didn't track at all when I was in Peru. Like, totally thought I was going to and brought my thermometer and I just didn't at all. And then it almost felt like I was starting over again. It was like, now I'm back into my first like rogue month, which was September. I'm like, well, that month doesn't count. Like, it's taken some time. And so I've really benefited learning about the cervical mucus from you and like what that means and how to do that. And um, because like it has taken some time and some changes. And of course, like I think you can travel and do this, but I was in Peru for a long time and it just kind of threw the whole charting out the window a little bit. And now I'm in this funny window. I think you might laugh at this because it brings it back to one of the misconceptions that you're pregnant every day of your cycle, right? And so now I'm in this space with my husband because I learned from you that I could actually ovulate during, like, I could have cervical mucus during my period and I could have ovulation on day like 5. Like I could. I'm not, but I could. And so now with my partner, we're in a space where I'm like, you just don't get to come, basically. We're not doing that protection, that style of protection for the first until I know I'm in my luteal phase.
Yeah.
Until I know and I can feel it in my body because of the signs I've been tracking for years. And he's like, wait a minute, you told me in the beginning there was only a 6-day window. So why?
Mhm.
What is this thing? And I'm like, because I'm being extra cautious.
So many things. I have so many things
So
to
many
comment on there.
things.
Number one, this is your permission slip to like take a break from charting whenever you need. Whether it's somebody who's traveling, somebody who, even if the charting is kind of becoming a little bit of a hindrance and maybe is causing more stress, take a break. That's totally okay. I take lots of breaks over the past 12 years. Sometimes I've charted in my head, sometimes, so it's like, that's totally fine. I love that you shared that. And also, yeah, and I love that you caught yourself there. That was so, I'm like, yes, that's someone who's got a good educator. You can't necessarily ovulate during menstruation, but the ovulation can happen so early as like day 9. Yeah, absolutely. That the mucus overlaps our period, making us fertile. Which brings me to the next comment, which is really important, is that, yeah, we're only biologically capable of getting pregnant 6 days per cycle. But when you chart, the times in which you have to keep sperm out of your body if you want to avoid pregnancy can be more than 6 days, right? And so I love how you shared how you're using your chart right now to avoid pregnancy. Because again, going back to that radical responsibility, every person and every couple or partners gets to decide for themselves what works best. So for you, it's just considering my entire pre-ovulatory phase infertile. Like, I just don't want to risk it. When I confirm ovulation, I know that like the egg is out, she's had her time to shine, but now she's gone. Now I feel confident that it's impossible for me to get pregnant. Okay, ejaculate away. So that is totally one way that you can use the method. And the reason why we may consider ourselves fertile for even longer than 6 days, and that's because of stress. Because our bodies will start to prepare for ovulation and we'll see cervical mucus. And then a chemical, physical, emotional stressor will delay the ovulation. And then the mucus will return for like another 4, 5, 6 days. So now this is like turning into, a couple weeks of fertility. Because the thing is, you can't know you've ovulated until after you've ovulated, right? You cannot predict when you will ovulate. You can only confirm that it's happened. And another big thing I always want to remind people is that there is a difference between ovulation and being fertile. Mm-hmm. So ovulation is an event. It's a single event in the cycle where the egg is released from the ovary and lives 12 to 24 hours if it's not fertilized. Being fertile means that your body is changing in a way, there's that word again, change, so we show up differently. Your body is changing in a way that it actually supports sperm survival. So that if the sperm can come into your body and live for 3 to 5 days. So just because you're fertile doesn't guarantee that you're going to ovulate. But when you do ovulate, it will be in a fertile time.
Right? That's a really clear distinction.
So every time, this is why the method is so effective, because we're not trying to predict when we're going to ovulate. We slow down, we listen, we look for the signs. Am I fertile today? Yes or no? If I'm fertile today, I may or may not ovulate 5 days from now. I don't know. All I know is that my cervix is open, the hotel of sperm is receiving clients, and if I don't want to get pregnant, then I'm going to keep sperm out of my body. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, of course, if you're in your pre-ovulatory time, and I know it can be tricky, especially the older we get, especially if we have an underlying thing kind of going on, especially if we have some work to do on our vaginal or our cervical health, the cervical mucus can be a little bit confusing. So for the first half of the cycle, if someone just wants to kind of play it safe and always use withdrawal or always use a condom, regardless of whether they see cervical mucus or not, so that they just know, like, okay, no sperm is in my body. So once that egg comes out, there's nothing there. They wait until they confirm ovulation with a peak day and with a change in their temperature. Good to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think my next goal is to get to the point where it is a little bit more nuanced, like where I'm not just saying, okay, beginning, nothing, ovulation, confirm ovulation, now I'm good to go. But for now, it's been a really good place for me personally, and that's why I share this with the audience, is like, what works for you and your partner?
Love it.
What works while you are learning a new form of body literacy and cyclical living, and like listening to your body and understanding cervical mucus and cervical position. And you're like, these are things like this takes some time. It's a learning curve. And again, that highlights the importance of a mentor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a lot there, and it's so worth it.
Yeah. I've changed over the 12 years how I use my cycle as contraception myself. So again, depending on who I'm dating, who I'm sleeping with, I will, like, if STIs are a concern for me, I'm always going to use condoms, right? Regardless of where I am in my cycle. Or if there have been times in my life where my cycle has been a bit confusing and I'm not really sure if I'm fertile or not, then you just consider yourself fertile, right? And you go from there. Right now I'm married. I'm open to the possibility of a pregnancy. The way I use my chart is way different than what I did a couple years ago. So yeah, there's fluidity in that. And, experiences can really change. Like someone might feel really confident using withdrawal and then they have an unplanned pregnancy and then they're like, okay, maybe that didn't work for me. And I don't feel very confident about that. So, and this is kind of where I go back again to the reminder that we're not controlling birth. We're not controlling our fertility. Right? I typically use the analogy of like learning to surf is learning to practice fertility awareness. I come from the prairies in the middle of Alberta in Canada. There's no oceans here. So when I went and lived in Mexico, I lived in Sayulita for some time. I didn't just like rent a surfboard and jump in the water. I have no idea. I have no literacy of the ocean or of the water or surfing. I had to watch first. I had to observe the waves. I had to learn, when do they come in? When do they come out? When is it safe? What are the skills that I need in order to have like a, happy, positive experience in the water? It's the same with fertility awareness. You need to start with observing. Observe your signs of fertility, observe yourself and your body, learn to identify when you're fertile and when you're not, when it's safe to get sperm in your body, when it's not, again, depending on your intentions, what you would love to achieve with the method. And then you go from there. And nothing is perfect. Nothing is 100%. And I got bumped a whole bunch of times on my board in the waves, in the same way that like through one's fertility awareness practice and through their journey through their reproductive life, yeah, life happens, things happen. And we grow through what we go through and we learn from it and we move on. So I could never see myself personally being on hormonal birth control after the benefits and the things that I've learned about myself and what it does for me and how I show up for myself by writing down my cervical mucus observations and taking my temperature every morning. Like it's a way I love myself. It's a self-care ritual for me. It's so much more than contraception.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And no matter how many times the waves would rock me, I'm always going to show up again for myself.
I mean, that's the funny thing about surfing, right? It's like no matter how much it hurts or like what happens, you still get out, get on your board, and
yeah. Fertility awareness is very similar.
I have a funny side story I'll share really quick about surfing. So also Utah, no ocean. I learned how to surf, I don't know, when I was in graduate school, maybe 10 years ago, 12 years ago. Went to Costa Rica, started learning how to surf. Was in Nicaragua with my husband, and I was like slowly getting better. It's really hard to get good at surfing when you go once a year. And I got raw. So I was like to the point where I was standing up and like actually kind of surfing. And I got rocked by this wave, and I was just getting tumbled and tossed around. And at the point I thought, at one point I like tried to come up, but I ended up hitting my board. So I couldn't come up, and I was getting more and more and more panicked. But as I was getting more and more panicked, the water was naturally pushing me towards the shore. But I was so discombobulated that I finally come up for air and I go, help! And I kind of look, I'm like trying to get oriented, and I hear my husband go, help, stand up. And I had been pushed to the shore and stood up and was in like ankle deep water. So it's just like this just funny story of like, I thought I was drowning, but all I actually needed to do was to become aware and stand up, and I was fine.
There's so many beautiful analogies in that story, like to compare to a fertility awareness practice. One of my favorites, you said, it's hard to get good at surfing when you only go once a year. And it's the same thing with fertility awareness. Like it's a practice. It takes time. It takes practice. You have to show up. So you do it every single day. You pay attention to, your body and your signs every single day. And then that's how you improve on, your skills and your interpretation and your confidence. And then to the even though you got rocked, it's like it was still supporting you, still bringing you to safety. The lessons were there, and you were fine in the end. So, woo!
Totally fine. Just needed to have some awareness, and then I was okay. Like that, I just love that surfing story, and I laugh about it all the time because it's like the perfect analogy to basically life and charting and learning anything new.
Yeah.
And all the lessons. I love it. I'm just reflecting if there's anything else I want to ask you. Is there anything else you feel important to share or called to share?
Yeah, I feel like this is a really beautiful way to end our conversation around this whole surfing analogy. Get back up on that board. No, just that charting can be fun and easy. If you are somebody who's listening to this conversation and you want to start charting but you don't know where to start, I offer free 30-minute online consultations. So I would love to chat with you and start talking about your personal story and if and how charting can benefit your life. And yeah, it can be for everyone at every age.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, literally every age. I mean, I'm 43,
Yeah.
so I started at 42, I think, but it's just I will say I found you on Instagram, so I'll share your Instagram below in the show notes, and then I jumped on a 30-minute consultation with you and then decided to do a one-on-one. I know you also do groups as
Mhm.
well intermittently, and are there other services you offer? Just the one-on-ones and the groups?
No, so I do the groups a couple times a year, and then I also offer private, which is a private program that typically goes for 4 to 6 months. So my group programs are 12 weeks. They're about 3 months where you learn in the community. You learn all of the things you need to know about charting. If you're somebody who kind of wants or prefers like that one-on-one personal and personalized teaching, especially if you have a particular focus that you want to address, then it does take time. And so I do the charting, the teaching, and then also the supporting, the goals, whatever that might be. So that's more of a 4 to 6 month time investment.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's awesome. I can speak firsthand like how much just how much I've learned from both watching you on Instagram and then one-on-one help is just it's been so, so important in my journey to just learn my body better and my cycle better and for me personally the goal of preventing pregnancy and wanting to have a healthy menopause as I start to eventually go down that road.
Mm, that makes my heart sing and my uterus vibrate.
Good. Yay. Well, thanks so much for joining. I will put how people can reach out to you also in the show notes, but how do people find you? How
Yeah,
do they connect?
just by my name, Chloe Skerlak. You can find me sharing funny reels and offering free education on Instagram all the time. You can find my website, chloeskerlak.com. I also have a YouTube video or a YouTube channel, Chloe Skerlak. Yeah, you just put that in Google and I'll show up. You can find me.
Yeah. And it's fun. Like you just have a really fun, lively, I don't know if you know do you know human design at all?
I do, but I've never taken the time to discuss to find out my own.
You don't know if you're a generator?
No. But does it show? Does it show?
Yeah, I would guess that perhaps she's a manifestor or a generator, just this like fun, exuberant energy, just super passionate about what she does. And it brings like aliveness to it. Like it makes my body be like, oh yeah, fun.
Oh, Alicia, that is so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing and pumping
Yeah.
me up. I really appreciate that. As you can imagine, this path can be a really lonely one sometimes. Be like entrepreneurial and like yeah. So I love to hear that. And I'm so grateful that you invited me to have this conversation with you today. And yeah, to just give me another opportunity to talk about how much I love menstrual cycles and fertility awareness.
Awesome.